Chapter 1: The Devastation of a Hurricane. The Call to Rebuild. The recent hurricane that swept through western North Carolina left behind immense destruction. Homes were damaged, roads were flooded, and communities were shaken. It was the first ever for the region, something that the southern states faced every year. The scenes of collapsed buildings and uprooted trees remind us of how nature's force can suddenly change lives. Families have been displaced, and many are left wondering how they will rebuild their lives from the rubble. But amidst the devastation, there's a glimmer of hope. Communities are coming together, showing incredible resilience. Neighbors are helping neighbors, volunteers are stepping up, and relief efforts are pouring in from different corners. It's a powerful reminder that in times of crisis, unity and compassion help people rise again. People are clearing debris, offering shelter, and lending hands to rebuild what was lost. This collective effort keeps the spirit of recovery alive.
This story of rebuilding reminds us of another historical figure who faced a similar challenge: Nehemiah.
After hearing about the destruction of Jerusalem's walls, he felt a deep call to restore what had been broken.
Nehemiah's journey was not just about rebuilding walls, but about restoring faith and identity to his people.
His story shows us that even in the face of great destruction, hope, faith, and leadership can guide us to recovery. In times of devastation, we often look to our communities to help us rebuild. As we see people coming together in western North Carolina to restore what was lost, it brings to mind a story from the Bible.
Nehemiah.
A man tasked with rebuilding the walls of a broken city.
Nehemiah led his people through faith,
leadership, and determination.
Chapter 2: Nehemiah's Mission.
Leading the way to rebuild. After the Babylonian exile, Jerusalem was left in a state of destruction. Its walls were reduced to rubble, leaving the city and its people vulnerable to attack. The situation is similar to what we see in communities devastated by disasters today, like the aftermath of the recent hurricane.
When Nehemiah learned about the broken walls of Jerusalem,
his heart was heavy with grief. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by the challenge, he turned to prayer and sought guidance.
Nehemiah understood
rebuilding the walls was not just about physical protection. It was about restoring the city's identity, security, and faith.
Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king,
a trusted position, but his heart was with his people in Jerusalem. After hearing about the destruction, he felt a deep responsibility to lead the rebuilding effort. He didn't just act on impulse.
Nehemiah prayed
and then courageously asked the king for permission to return to Jerusalem to rebuild its walls. His leadership came from a place of faith and determination, setting an example for anyone stepping up to help in difficult times.
Nehemiah's leadership
wasn't based on grand gestures. It started with careful prayer and preparation. Before making any public plans, he quietly inspected the damaged walls of Jerusalem at night, assessing the scale of the work ahead. He was deliberate in his actions, relying on God for guidance and keeping his plans close until the right moment.
Nehemiah took personal responsibility for leading the people,
setting a model for leaders in times of crisis.
Today, disaster relief leaders show the same dedication as Nehemiah.
They inspect the damage, create strategic plans, and bring people together to rebuild.
Like Nehemiah,
they rely on their faith and sense of responsibility to guide their communities through the recovery process. From volunteers organizing resources to leaders taking charge,
the spirit of Nehemiah's mission
lives on in modern efforts to rebuild after disaster.
Chapter 3: Overcoming Challenges. Nehemiah's Unshakable Leadership. As Nehemiah began rebuilding Jerusalem's walls,
he didn't just face the challenge of construction, he also faced strong opposition from neighboring groups. These groups didn't want to see Jerusalem restored and made their objections clear. Sanballat,
one of Nehemiah's main adversaries,
mocked the rebuilding efforts and tried to undermine the morale of the workers. His ridicule and scorn were meant to discourage the people from completing the task. Despite the constant opposition,
Nehemiah never gave up.
He organized the workers, set up guards for protection, and leaned on his faith in God to guide him through these difficult times. The neighboring leaders tried to frighten the workers and make them abandon their efforts.
But Nehemiah's focus and determination didn't waver.
He constantly reminded the people that they were not working alone. God was with them, and their mission was greater than just rebuilding walls. They were rebuilding their future, their families, and their community.
Nehemiah was a practical leader.
He divided the workers into groups, with some rebuilding the walls and others standing guard to protect against any attacks. This strategy ensured that the workers could continue despite the threats they faced.
But Nehemiah's leadership
wasn't just about practical measures. He was also a source of inspiration. He encouraged the people, reminding them that they were fighting for their families and homes, and that God's strength would carry them through. Today, communities hit by disasters face similar obstacles. The damage is not just physical, there's an emotional toll as well.
But like Nehemiah's people,
modern communities find ways to stay resilient. Neighbors support each other, volunteers help with rebuilding, and leaders guide the efforts. Despite the challenges, the strength of unity and the belief that they are rebuilding for their families and future generations helps them persevere. Chapter 4: The Power of Unity. Communities rebuilding as one.
Nehemiah's
greatest strength was his ability to bring people together. He knew that rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem couldn't be done alone or by just a few individuals. It had to be a group effort, with every family and community member playing their part.
Nehemiah assigned
different sections of the wall to various families and groups, ensuring that everyone had a role. Together, they worked with determination, and in only 52 days, they rebuilt the walls that once protected their city. This wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about rebuilding the heart of the community, restoring hope, and strengthening their identity.
Nehemiah's leadership was rooted in faith.
And this faith was shared by the people who worked beside him. They didn't just rebuild with their hands, they rebuilt with their hearts, trusting in God to guide them. Even when their enemies doubted their ability, they continued because they believed their work had a higher purpose. This same determination can be seen today in communities recovering from disasters. Volunteers and community members find strength in their faith and each other, knowing that they are not just restoring buildings, but also restoring lives.
The spirit of unity that helped Nehemiah build Jerusalem is very much alive today.
In the aftermath of the hurricane, community members, organizations, and volunteers from all over have come together to rebuild. Whether it's hammering nails, distributing food, or offering emotional support, everyone has a role.
Just as in Nehemiah's time,
it's the combined effort of many people, each bringing their skills and strengths to the table, that makes the rebuilding process possible. Unity, faith, and determination are what drive these efforts forward. Chapter 5: Faith in Action. The spirit that drives us to rebuild.
Nehemiah's leadership shows us the power of faith in overcoming adversity.
His mission to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem wasn't just about construction, it was about restoring hope and security for his people. His prayers were a constant source of strength, helping him push forward, even when others tried to discourage him.
Nehemiah knew
that his work was guided by a higher purpose, and that faith gave him the resilience to keep going.
When others doubted, Nehemiah prayed for strength, and that unwavering faith made all the difference. Just as Nehemiah rebuilt Jerusalem's walls,
communities today are coming together to rebuild after disasters like hurricanes. Whether through donations, hands-on volunteering, or even offering emotional support, every contribution matters. We all have a role to play in helping those in need. Standing together, much like Nehemiah's people, we show that no disaster is too big when we unite to rebuild. In Western North Carolina and beyond, the spirit of resilience is deeply tied to faith. People find strength in prayer, community worship, and their trust in a brighter future. Faith is what drives people to keep working and to show up even when things seem hopeless. It's the belief that with God's help and each other's support, everything can be rebuilt.
Much like Nehemiah's mission,
the rebuilding efforts today are fueled by faith, determination, and a deep commitment to helping one another.
The story of Nehemiah reminds us
That our true strength lies in our unity, resilience, and faith. In these disaster zones, we see the same spirit alive in every volunteer, every act of kindness, and every effort to rebuild what was lost. Chapter 6.
the legacy of Nehemiah.
Rebuilding lives today.
Nehemiah's legacy wasn't just about rebuilding walls.
It was about restoring hope and identity. His leadership brought the people together after a time of deep loss. He knew that the real rebuilding wasn't just physical, but spiritual and emotional too. The walls of Jerusalem represented more than protection. They were a symbol of the people's dignity and their connection to God.
Nehemiah's faith,
Determination and leadership became a lasting example of resilience and community strength.
in the wake of the recent hurricane, the same spirit of Nehemiah lives on in communities coming together to rebuild.
It's not just about repairing homes and infrastructure, it's about restoring the hearts and lives of the people affected. Acts of service, leadership, and faith are helping families rebuild their futures. This work is not just a physical task, it's about healing relationships, creating new connections, and restoring a sense of belonging. Every piece of progress made, whether small or large, is a reminder of the strength of unity and resilience.
Just as Nehemiah's people overcome their challenges,
Today's communities are doing the same. The progress is visible not only in repaired homes, but in moments of joy returning to families.
the legacy of Nehemiah
Is alive in these efforts, showing that with faith and teamwork, no obstacle is too great. The spirit of rebuilding is not just in the bricks and mortar, it's in the hearts of the people who refuse to give up, even in the hardest times.
Nehemiah's story lives on in each act of kindness.
Every plan for recovery, and every volunteer who steps up to make a difference.